Okay, so we're very excited to be joined this morning by the Orr Foundation. We're going to be talking about secondhand clothing trade and true sustainability, and excited to hear from our presenters in just a moment. But like I said, just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are in the middle of our No New Clothes campaign. If you're familiar, No New Clothes is our summer campaign where we ask folks to commit to just buying nothing new for 90 days. It's a very, low barrier to entry, easy to access campaign, a great way to tell your friends about the work of Remake, because really all we're asking folks to do is to do less. And sometimes that little commitment to not buying new is just the start you need on your sustainable journey. So if you haven't signed the No New Clothes pledge yet, strongly encourage you to do so. We'll drop the link in the chat to that and would love to have you. There are already 1,200 people taking part in the No New Clothes challenge, which is just so exciting. So, if it is your first time doing a pledge like this and you need a little encouragement, you've definitely got community beside you. All right, next up, I wanted to introduce you to a couple new members of the team. If you've been on our last couple of community calls, you might have met myself or Elizabeth Klein. We're really excited to join Remake and work on the advocacy and campaigning efforts of the organization. I also want to introduce you to Mila and Julie, two new members of the team. Mila is working on our Pay Up Fashion campaign, and Julie is our Director of Leadership Development. We're also joined by Conchi and Maggie, who are our summer interns, and we're so glad to have you supporting the Remake team this summer. Really couldn't do it without all of these amazing folks behind the scenes. Some you'll have met in person and some maybe you'll just have communicated with, but please know how much we appreciate all that you're doing for the organization. Okay, a little bit on some upcoming programs. We are starting a No New Gift Exchange Remake ambassadors this month. It will be a super fun kind of pen pal-esque program. I've got a form that you can put your name and contact information in, and then I'll be pairing you up with another Remake ambassador. And we encourage you to participate in a gift exchange. The only rule is that you can't buy anything new. Otherwise, you can make that gift exchange whatever you would like it to look like. And so, like I said, I'll be dropping that form in the chat shortly, and you can sign up and we will pair you with your partner. We're also going to be hosting this same week, Thursday, July 15th, a fabric gift wrapping program with Remake Ambassador Harmony. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Harmony so she can tell you a little bit about her program. Let's see if I can find Harmony. She might not yet be on the call, but she's really excited to give you an instruction into sustainable gift wrapping. This is something that she and her family have done for years, and so she's got a nice little workshop planned up to teach you to do fabric gift wrapping. We'll put more information about that in the Slack for you shortly. We're also going to be hosting a Changemakers and Reuse program on July 30th, and we're going to be featuring a couple of amazing changemakers in the reuse space. The creators of Picnic Wear, which is an upcycled clothing brand, Hidden Opulence, which is a vintage alterations and garment tailoring studio, and the Consistency Project, which is an awesome upcycled and secondhand brand. So those are all the housekeeping updates we have for you. And now I'm going to introduce and kick it over to our guests today. So really excited to be joined by the team at the Orr Foundation, Liz Ricketts, who is the co-founder and director, Chloe, who is the programs manager, and Sammy, who is the project coordinator at the Orr Foundation. And I'm going to kick it over to the team so they can tell you a little bit about themselves and what they do.
Thanks, Emily. Would it be possible to share my screen?
Yeah, let me just make you a co-host.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. We're really grateful to be here among so many friends and collaborators. Let me see. You can see my screen now. So again, thank you, Emily, for the introduction. I'm Liz. I'm the co-founder and director of the OR Foundation. And as Emily mentioned, we're joined today by Sammy. Chloe is hopefully going to be able to join us for the Q&A, but she got caught up in one of our initiatives and is in a really loud place. So she's not so sure if she'll be able to join. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, we are a USA and Ghana-based NGO working at the intersection of environmental justice, education, and fashion development. And we've been working between these two countries for over a decade and working in solidarity with the Consumanto secondhand market in Accra since 2016. And Emily invited us to speak today in support of Remake's No New Clothes campaign, which is very much in line with our mission. In fact, we often recommend that people take off a whole year from buying anything new, not only to detox from hyper-consumerism, but also to really think more critically about the secondhand economy and also now the resale economy, reverse logistics, and fashion favorite buzzword, circularity. And so to that end, we've prepared a short presentation introducing you to Consumanto, and then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So Consumanto is the largest secondhand clothing market in West Africa, probably the largest in the world. The market started small along a railroad to service travelers coming into Accra for meetings. And that's because under colonial rule, Ghanaians were expected to conform to professional dress codes as defined by the British, who first serviced this artificial demand, first through hand-me-downs and then through the official secondhand clothing trade. And Ghana gained its independence in 1957, which was the same time as the mall boom and the introduction of credit cards in the United States and across the global north. So essentially, this increasing pace of production and consumption in the global north required an outlet, right? And this outlet became the secondhand clothing trade. And because Ghanaians were required to wear professional dress codes as defined by the British, that to enter certain rooms, to get certain jobs, these garments started to signal proximity to power, which created a demand for the goods. And so all of this has, been marketed to us as charity, but the secondhand clothing trade has always been a for-profit venture. And in many ways, at least from our perspective, the secondhand economy has also become an excuse for the firsthand economy to continue pursuing limitless growth. So since Ghana's independence, Consumanto has also continued to grow itself. So today there are at least 5,000 registered stalls and an estimated 30,000 people work here. Every Thursday, importers unload containers of secondhand goods from all over the world. Most of the clothing is coming from the UK, the USA, Korea, Canada, and Holland. And in total, Consumanto sees 15 million garments a week in a country of 32 million people. Now, a significant percentage of this clothing is recirculated, about 25 million garments every single month. And this is in large part due to the intimate relationship that most Ghanaian citizens have with clothing, because most people grow up taking cloth to a local tailor and co-designing their wardrobe so that they understand, how clothing is constructed and are also very comfortable with customization. And so this means that when people come to shop at Consumanto, they're not really expecting to find exactly what they want, exactly in their size, but they're looking for material that they can alter and that they can make their own. Consumanto is also a model of sustainability because it's not simply a place to buy clothing. On the contrary, Consumanto is also a design studio and a factory all in one. So the clothing can constantly be rethought and reworked right there in the market. There's tailors and seamstresses, screen printers, whole sections of the market dedicated to over dyeing, and also people there to iron, mend, and wash clothing. So it's thanks to this consumer agency and indigenous sustainability logic that Consumanto is responsible for extending the life of far more garments than any resale platform in the United States. So for comparison, ThredUp's 2020 report states that they've recirculated 100 million items total over 10 years, whereas Consumanto recirculates 100 million items every 4 months. And we like to point this out, not to diminish the good work that ThredUp and other resale platforms are doing, but to highlight the sort of inequities and colonial power dynamics that persist throughout our industry. Because whereas platforms like ThredUp have received millions of dollars of investment, Consumanto's retailers are going into debt. And this is despite the fact that Consumanto is more impactful, and despite the fact that business models like ThreadUp only really exist because Consomanto is there to catch the stuff that these platforms cannot capitalize off of. But Consomanto is not a retail utopia where every item is sold, where every item is reused and diverted from landfill. Unfortunately, there's no such thing. At the end of the day, our research found that 40% of the clothing that flows through Consomanto will leave the market as waste. And unfortunately, that's usually within 1 to 2 weeks of landing at port. And I want to be clear that most of the clothing waste is not necessarily unwearable. It simply does not have enough value because the sheer quantity of excess has driven prices so low, and also because it's teaching people to view clothing as disposable. Consomanto is the largest consolidated point of waste in all of Accra, and this waste is handled informally by individuals and also formally by the government. So the local government collects about 70 tons of clothing waste from Consomanto every single day. This waste was being taken to Accra's main landfill called Pone, but the clothing waste caused the landfill to overflow and then eventually to explode in August of 2019, rendering it useless and forcing the government to dump the waste in informal sites and into quarries. And then meanwhile, even before Pone exploded, most of Consomanto's clothing never went to landfill because the government does not have the budget or the trucks to transport all of the clothing that is generated each day. So some of this waste will be swept into the open gutter system, which in turn increases flood risk, which in turn increases the risk of cholera and malaria. And eventually this clothing will be pushed out to sea. Some of it is also dumped directly into the ocean. And once it's at sea, some of this clothing, as you can see, is washed up on the beaches, where then it basically is going to be burned because there's no better option, right? There's no landfill to take it to. And even more will end up on the ocean floor, where it will leach microfibers and chemicals from dye and make life more dangerous for fishing communities who have to travel further out to sea in order to avoid running into these tangled masses of clothing. They get stuck in their motors, and that can also weigh down their nets, causing them to capsize. But unfortunately, there's still more clothing waste that then goes to landfill or the ocean. The remaining waste from Consomanto is dumped in informal settlements. This is a photo of a 30-foot dump that is over 60% clothing waste. Actually, this clothing dump has nearly doubled in the last year and a half, causing the waste pickers who work here to light it on fire. Basically, everything that you see in this picture, this is one face of the dump site that sits next to a river, and it's been completely burnt because they have no other way to minimize the space. So this clothing dump is located in an informal settlement called Old Fatima, where roughly 80,000 people live, some of them working in Consomanto. So this waste, that you're seeing right now it's in people's backyards. Children play here, cattle graze here. This clothing waste is also next to the largest e-waste dump in the world, and it's considered one of the most toxic places on our planet. But this waste does more than cause environmental destruction. It's used to further disenfranchise vulnerable populations, basically to shame people living in poverty and to dispossess them of their land. It's used to literally justify bulldozing their homes and displacing them without any form of compensation. And this is really important because waste colonization is about far more than the sort of initial dumping and use of land as a sink. It's a cycle of displacement and dehumanization that we see happen over and over and over again. All right, Sammy, your turn. Are you there? Sammy.
Hello.
Hi.
Yay.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, I'm not able to put my video on. My internet is not so great, so I'm just gonna go with audio. I'm sorry you can't see me. I can see you all. So I'm Sammy from Accra, Ghana. I am a designer and also project coordinator and also a fellow researcher with the OR Foundation. And I will just give a bit of what I do with the OR Foundation. So secondhand clothing waste clearly has a negative impact on Accra's environment, but there are also social impacts. Much of my work is focused on interacting with the retailers in Consomanto. Retailers pay a lot of money for bills of secondhand goods, even though the clothing that arrives here is considered lower quality. Bills can cost anywhere from $75 to $500 a piece. When they get a bill, retailers immediately start sorting it into piles of selections. First selection is considered the most valuable, and we found that this makes up 18% of the average bill. The issue is that retailers have to make up to 80%, 90% of their money back off of the first selection alone. Those aren't good odds. This is important to know that here that retailers cannot return their bills, unlike in the global north where consumers can buy three different sizes of the same thing and return what doesn't work. There is no recourse for retailers who buy a bad bill, even though they are buying hundreds of garments without being able to see them. The retailers cannot return it to the exporter, and so they are stuck with the losses. This is why retailers call their job a gambling job. Our research shows that less than 20% of Cantamantos retailers make a profit. Over 40% do not make their money back and operate on credit. So yes, many people have created a job themselves through Cantamanto, but many also tell us that the job is becoming less dignified and too risky. And this then leaves them in a very vulnerable position whenever there is a disaster. On December 15, 2020, just before Christmas, a fire destroyed part of Cantamanto. Over 200 retailers and tailors were impacted. Their shops burned to the ground. Many lost over 5,000 in goods. 2020 was not a great year, with more retailers taking out loans than ever before. They were counting on Christmas as a time when they could break even or make small profits. Instead, the fire plunged them into debt. Most of the clothing that ends up in Cantamanto comes from the same brands that made the pay-up list for canceling orders during the pandemic, leaving garment workers to starve. These companies are indebted to garment workers. Then you have Cantamanto retailers going into debt to try to buy bills full of clothing from the same brands. It's a very violent situation. We organized a relief fund for the retailers and tailors who lost goods in the fire. Though dispersing the funds and through our various projects, we have been extremely humbled. And unfortunately, we have also seen that the situation is growing worse. So many retailers are suffering. This is true because yesterday just as I said, most of my work is keeping in touch and interacting with the retailers. So every now and then I just have casual conversations with them. And just over the weekend, one of my friends from the market part, I was just speaking to her about, her work and then how things are being and how she sees the future. And it was very sad what she said. I just wanted to quote exactly what she said to me. So her words were, it gets worse. In a few years, zero will be our best profit. This is better than death at least. So already there are so many people in the market who are in this business working so hard 6 days a week from 4 a.m. as early as 4 a.m. to as late as 7 p.m. in the evening. And all they do is just constantly do this job without making any money at all. My friend who has been working in Cantamanto for over 5 years now, says like when she started, she was able to make a little bit of money, but now she just makes no money, or her average income is zero and her worst is debt. So already there is very little that they're making. I would also like to share a bit of light on colonial legacy and design. Another social impact is the way secondhand clothing helps our creative local economy. Usually when people discuss how secondhand clothing affects design, they usually talk about the textile sector or the textile industry. But the thing is, it really has a great impact on the creative and that, for that matter, the fashion industry as well. Such that on a personal level, I've been working in that design for about 10 years now. And one thing that I realized, outside of all the impacts that it have, it really creates a bad image for the work for my practice. And then it puts me in a state where there's very little or no dignity in my practice anymore. Because it's the case, like you've gone through the idea of becoming a fashion designer and creating all of these things. But here's the case, the influx of secondhand clothing already in itself has a way of changing the minds of people and how they feel about clothing. I've always felt like here in Ghana and in Africa for that matter, people have very genuine relationships with clothes. But then with the influx of garment coming every day, it really shifts people's idea from relating to it as it should be or as it used to be. And now they only see them as a piece of commodity, something disposable. So it really creates very less respect and very less dignity in my line of work. And another thing is because most of these work, or most of secondhand, the secondhand culture is based on colonial legacy. As before, before anybody could integrate into the colonial system or into what the colonizers have built, you had to dress a certain type of way. And so it really stripped off the cultural way of dressing or of our own identity, of our own views of fashion. And now the only thing you had to do is like dress a certain type of way to be able to enter certain spaces or um, be in certain standard. Unfortunately, that created a very detrimental effect on how people generally see fashion or a creative industry or as our culture. And for me as a designer, one thing that really bothers me is that I believe in the global north. One of the reasons why people have have no relationship with your clothing is because there isn't any relation. People just keep seeing clothing as something that is disposable, something that you use and just throw away. And the painful thing is that slowly an influx of secondhand clothing coming in, people and in the mindsets of people in Ghana, which are naturally sustainable, is slowly shifting. Now, the coming generation do not have the type of relationship that generally we had with clothing. And then they're starting to view clothing as disposable as well. And then that, hello?
Go ahead, Sammy. I think it's just someone else's sound effect.
Okay.
You're doing great. We can hear you.
Okay, so the whole idea of this really dilutes the image and the respect of like local creatives and then creatives within this region.
Someone just joined. If they could please mute. Sorry about that, Sam. We'll see who just joined who isn't muted. Please go ahead.
Okay. So as I was saying, with all of this in view, it really creates a very detrimental effect on the creative industry, in as much that most people do not even have as much respect as they have. I was just like drop off by saying this. Just a couple of years ago, before I started working with the OR, I was in Cantamanto, and there was a rain, so there was just like a little bit of flood. And I mean, when there's flood, you see water, but this time I did not see any water. It was this wave of clothes and used shoes moving towards me. And at that moment, like I teared up a bit and I had like almost a heartbreak because I was thinking, if I'm a designer and I'm supposed to design clothes and shoes for people to appreciate, is this how my creativity is going to end? Is this where it's going to end? In a place where nobody has respect for it, it's just like, something disposable that you use one day and throw away the next day.
Thanks, Sammy. I think what Sammy shared is so important because those of us who are familiar with the sort of arguments that are pro continuing to export clothing to the global south know that typically people suggest that the secondhand clothing trade stops brands, fast fashion brands like H&M from coming to these countries. But what Sammy just explained and has proven to you is that it actually primes people to desire those brands and to desire sort of fast fashion and disposable fashion. So thank you, Sammy. So picking up on the labor implications, one of the most essential roles in Contamanto is that of the Kaye, which means she who carries the burden, and those are female head porters. Contamanto's Kaye, some as young as 14 years old, they can be as young as 8, but in Contamanto they're typically 14 to 30. What they do is they transport bales of clothing between importers to retailers, and then they also transport the clothing throughout the market and some of the waste at the end of the day. Now, each bale of clothing that we export from the global north to Ghana weighs between 120 to 200 pounds. So this is often their entire body weight, if not heavier. And typically they have their babies wrapped around their backs, and these women are weaving in and out of the market as people are shopping. So it's very, very difficult for them to maneuver. Traveling a mile or more, they are paid between 30 cents to $1 per trip, which is barely enough to cover their daily expenses. Not only are Kaye living in debt slavery, but their labor is physically backbreaking. Many Kaye are injured when bales fall and break their limbs. Some of them die because their necks break under the weight of these bales, and babies are also killed because the bales fall backwards and crush them. We do a lot of work with women and girls who work as Kaye. It's a very complex situation with implications both locally and globally. But perhaps I think most important for everyone here to understand is that the labor of the Kaye is what makes the recirculation of clothing possible in Consumanto. Cheap goods require cheap labor. And in the context of Consumanto, it is the Kaye who carry the literal burden of fashion's exploitative system. So the conversation around secondhand is often extremely oversimplified. So we hope that this introduction to Consumanto has expanded your thinking a little bit. It's really important that those of us in the global north do not treat the secondhand clothing trade as a panacea, sort of blindly swapping out used for new, because what you may consider secondhand is actually the primary supply chain for over half of the global population, including many people in Ghana. And as an organization, we essentially want to strengthen the good work already happening in Consumanto while also accompanying the community out of debt and into positions of power so that they not only understand the system that they're a part of, but can advocate for themselves. And to us, this looks like catalyzing what we call a justice-led circular economy. We are focusing on manifesting this vision basically via 3 focal points. So one is exploring recycling and decomposition pathways by building a cooperative where the technology is made locally, can be maintained locally, and owned locally. But even more important to us than material preservation is ensuring that the circular economy strengthens the social reciprocity that makes Consumanto what it is. Because again, Consumanto is not a technology-enabled resale platform with a founder and investors. Consumanto is successful in recirculating so many items precisely because it is comprised of 30,000 individual entrepreneurs, all operating with a collectivist mentality, organized into a few hundred mutual aid networks, and sort of working on the fringes of the dominant system. And there are many, many ways that a well-intentioned circular economy could corrupt this culture instead of strengthen it. And this is a lot of what we're trying to figure out. And then the second area where we work is again with the Kaye, creating new forms of employment and building food sovereignty. So we offer direct aid to Kaye, but we also have peer network and support system for them, introducing the girls to a range of jobs that women can do and empowering them to see themselves in those roles, of facilitating apprenticeships out of the peer network. We also teach photography and videography to Kaye so that they can tell their own stories, which is really important to us. And then we also are running a chiropractic study and treatment program looking at the impact of head carrying on the girl's skeletal structure. Data from that will hopefully assist us in forming a policy agenda and feed. The data will also inform the infrastructure that we develop around material recovery and circular economy. And then the third area we focus is advocacy, which looks like continued research, engaging with policymakers, especially around EPR, and producing media to raise awareness. We also direct funds to the community and have a secondhand solidarity fund where folks from the global north can contribute and share profits. And we'll stop here to take any questions that you might have. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Liz and Sammy. Thank you so much. Please drop your questions in the chat and we would be happy to address them. I think just to start things off, it really strikes me how much those of us in the global north have to learn about the folks who are doing the most in terms of recirculation. You know, when you share those statistics, comparing the impact of Contamonto, it is really so clear that that's who needs to be leading this conversation about the secondhand recirculation economy.
Thank you, Emily. Sammy, do you want to chime in? Don't know. Right?
Oh, just want to say thank you. I was mute before.
Anyone have questions?
Could you talk to us a little bit? I mean, when we see these images, it's so obvious that there's a overproduction problem that is contributing to this massively. Why is it that committing to not buying new is the first thing you suggest over everything else in terms of like how we can make an impact on this problem?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, I mean, it's mostly it's not for the material impact. You know, I think it would take a lot of us not buying anything new to have an impact on the flow of the material, but it's for the mental impact. It's for the ability to sort of think about the conditioning and the impulses and what drives us to continue buying so many things, and to look at our closet in a different way, to appreciate, you know, we recommend that during that year, people, you know, choose 5 garments out of their closet to do something new with, whether that's learning to mend, taking it to a local tailor, or even disassembling it, which might sound very strange. But through disassembling your own clothes, you really start to appreciate the labor that's going to be necessary for a circular economy, which is very important at this moment in time. And B, you start to just have a different level of wonder about clothing construction, and you start to think about the shape of, you know, different parts of your garments, and little things like that really open us up to look at clothing in a completely different way. And I think that, yeah, I think buying nothing new for a year also, it proves that we can. I think most people who take that on, and I'm sure all of you who are participating in the summer of buying nothing new, it's really empowering to prove to yourself that that's possible. And it seems hard at first, but then, you know, once you get the hang of it, once you're about a month in, most people tell us that it just kind of like fades into the background, which is really empowering.
Yeah.
I just wanted to chime in. So one of our friends from Cantonment, Abena, like strongly thinks that the only reason why there are always so many clothes coming from the global north is because people from the global north do not wear clothes more than 2 weeks. After the maximum they can ever wear clothes is 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks they throw it away. So maybe with no new clothes, you could prove to Abena that you can do better.
At least 1,200 of us, maybe.
Yes.
We've got a question.
I'll make sure Abena knows that.
Tell her for us.
Yes.
We've got a question from one of our ambassadors asking, you know, you mentioned that mutual aid is a strong part of the community at Contamonto. So asking about cooperative efforts or collective actions that are currently happening in the community.
Yeah, so Contamonto, I mean, the retailers in Contamonto, they still have to pay fees. So they pay, you know, a fee to rent the stall, for waste management, for electricity. And all of this is organized basically within groups that are no more than 100 people per group. And then there are overarching associations. And so when there's a disaster or someone in the market dies and they need to organize a funeral, like all of the money comes out of that shared pot. And it's also very, you know, empowering for people on a political level. These groups, these mutual aid networks get together and organize around political issues whenever there's an election or if something's going on that they want to, you know, be vocal about. And so they know each other very, very well, and they're accountable to one another, right? If the lights go off, they know who to go to right next to them to ask, hey, did you pay our electricity bill? And they can hold each other accountable to that in a way that really, really works. But something that we saw, which Stanley can speak more to, is with delivering the funds for the fire relief. The fire in Contamanto was started on purpose. It was started by a real estate developer who wants to build a mall, which is starting a much larger conversation. But that's one of the reasons why it was so important for us to organize money and to work with people in the market, because events like that force people to start to distrust one another. Was someone in the market responsible for letting the person in to start the fire? Was somebody, who can they trust? Can they still trust their neighbor? Can they still trust the people that they're connected to? And so being able to come in and facilitate, direct giving, and to trust the leaders of the mutual aid networks to, help us distribute that funding, bringing people together around those conversations has been about a lot more than just the money, although the money has been very helpful. And I think, again, to the point around circularity, this is something that we're thinking about constantly. It's probably the thing that keeps me up at night most, because we have a lot of interest from outside parties of various sorts who are interested in facilitating recycling of some of the waste. And I won't go into it in detail, but basically you have to imagine that we know there's recycling technologies available for just cellulose or just polyester. Okay, so what if we come into the market and we start buying back the waste just from people who sell polyester garments? You have to really figure out what the right price is for that. But B, you have to also understand that if you only go in and start buying things from people who are selling polyester ladies' tops, you start to corrupt that mutual network, right? You start to possibly over-incentivize people bringing in more polyester tops because now there's an outlet for them to sell it to. And B, you create competition, this artificial competition, this new kind of competition between the retailers, right? And that's something that I don't think many people are really thinking about at this point in time, but it's something that we have to really consider in terms of, if we are going to start buying back waste and helping people out of debt in that way, how can we do it so that the profit is shared and goes towards, collective good?
I just
Sammy,
wanted to,
go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit on the mutual aid within the community. So outside of the funds that we raise for the fire relief, like through the section that got burned, one thing I learned while we were disbursing the money, and then even with the general infrastructure development of Contamanto, is something that they've done among themselves. So there's barely any or zero support coming from the government. So any little infrastructure that they have to do within the market is done by the market people themselves. For example, within a lane or an aisle, if they need to fix the floor or fix some roof or something, they all individually put money together, and then they start from one end. And by the end of a year or by the end of a couple of months, they've been able to work through all of it. And this is always a group effort. And then talking about the fire as well, before we were able to get the funds in, because it took a while before we were able to raise enough money. But before we were able to get the funds in, those who were not able to start their fees and those who had their friends' shops available, they were working alongside them to help them move their business as they save to start their own or resume their own work. So this really explained to you how much of an effort or of a cooperative effort that goes on within their community. It's basically like a family. Sometimes if you go there, you basically think it's just one big shop running, but it's just very, very individual entrepreneurs doing their own job.
We've got time for one more question, and I think kind of summarizing a couple of things that several people have asked. What would you say is the ask that you want people to be making, whether it be of big brands in the global north, whether it be of, quote unquote, leaders in the secondhand industry? Is it that we want to be asking for investment in Contamonto? What would be the thing that we could do to hold these brands accountable?
Thanks, Emily. So investment is tricky because people want something back for investment. So we usually phrase it as reparations. And one of the ways that we're looking at how that can be done is including ecological reparations, or at least global recourse within EPR policies. So if money is, or if material clothing is leaving a global north country, then the money collected from those brands through EPR schemes should go with it to help fund local circular economies. But honestly, I think we are, in terms of something that I think would be helpful for the community, is asking for more transparency, not only from brands, but from people who are operating in the secondhand economy and reverse economy. So resale platforms asking for solidarity, and people who are collecting, charities and for-profits who are collecting and exporting the clothing, because the truth is that they don't know about their own supply chain at all. It's quite shocking. I had a conversation with one of the major exporters last week and was talking about this issue with the recycling and how, if we're going to collect the waste, we can't employ kaye, we can't have kaye carrying the waste throughout the market, all these things you have to think through. And he was saying, well, I would hate for my organization to be connected to the kaye labor. And I was saying, well, it already is. Anyone who's exporting clothing to the global south, or especially to Ghana, but head portering is common in many places, who's saying that they're diverting clothing from landfill, they're only able to fulfill that mission through the labor of women like the kaye. And that's very important for people to be accountable to. Yeah, Sammy, do you have any?
I think you said it all, but like most importantly, reparations, because I mean, I hear investments used all the time, but I'm very happy that Liz cleared that sometimes when people invest, they want something back. I think people in Cantamanto and the Cantamanto community have been giving to the world all their lives. And I mean, this is no time for anybody to want anything from them. They've already given us so much. So if there's anything, is reparations, making sure that they have a safety net and they're protected.
And the last thing I'll say is that we can't allow brands to treat waste as if it's a free resource or a cheap resource. So the circular economy currently right now is being expected to compete with the linear economy on price. And that makes no sense if we're deciding that the linear economy is unstable. And that's something that's very, very important, just to push back on that kind of rhetoric and marketing from brands. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate you taking the time with us today. Elizabeth, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next portion to talk with folks about some of our advocacy work.
Yeah, absolutely. Liz and Sammy, thank you so much for talking to us today. Like I know all of us could just listen to you for a lot longer, and we all have so many questions. The community here at Remake and Pay Up Fashion, we want to keep supporting what you're doing. So yeah, we just look forward to continuing to collaborate. Because there are just so many parallels between what's going on in the secondhand supply chain and the fast fashion supply chain. So the main thing that I want to talk to everybody about today is what's going on with the Accord campaign. Between now and August 31st, we're asking our community to support a campaign to renew the Bangladesh Accord on fire and building safety. I'm just going to see how much time I have. Okay. So I'll condense some of the things I was going to say. So just to give a little bit of background, the Accord is a historic workplace safety agreement that was signed in 2013 after the Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh, which stole over 1,130 lives. But one thing that is perhaps not talked about as much is that in the years preceding Rana Plaza, there were many other factory fires and disasters that took hundreds of other garment maker lives in Bangladesh and Pakistan. And that period between 2005 and 2013 was the deadliest for garment workers in the history of the fashion industry. So it was even worse in terms of how many people's lives were taken than the early period of the Industrial Revolution in the United States and the UK. Rana Plaza was this turning point where the industry realized that factory fires and factory collapses are a systemic issue. They were going to keep happening if we didn't change the way we approached workplace safety. So what came out of that was the Accord. And the Accord is different than other workplace safety initiatives in one really key way, which is that it's legally binding. So brands sign on to a contract agreeing to overhaul factories. And while the factories are being overhauled, they commit to keep placing orders in factories, right? So they agree to not leave Bangladesh. They agree to stay there, keep placing orders, and make sure that those repairs are financially feasible. So since 2013, the Accord has made incredible progress on workplace safety. There have been, just by comparison, there have been over 6,000 industrial fires in Bangladesh since 2013 in other sectors. But, and we actually just saw one in a juice factory in Bangladesh last week where over 50 people died. But in the garment industry, we've seen just a lot of progress in this area. So over 100,000 safety issues have been remediated in factories in Bangladesh, in over 1,600 factories, protecting 2 million people's lives. So that brings us up to today. The original Accord agreement expired in 2018. It got a 2-year extension. And then in May, we got a 3-month extension. So what our community is doing right now is saying, no, we want this agreement to continue. The Accord works and we want it to be extended and expanded into new countries. So more workers can benefit from the power of this legally binding agreement. So we are targeting 5 brands. If you have been participating in the campaign, you know we started with H&M the first week, and then we did a email writing campaign to Zara. And this week we're writing to Tommy. So Tommy Hilfiger is part of the PVH Corporation, and Tommy was actually producing in a factory in Bangladesh, in 2010, where 29 people died. And as a result, Tommy was actually one of the first companies to sign on to an early version of the Accord, which is why we are expecting them to take a leadership role on this and agree to renew and expand the Accord. So we've made all this super easy for you guys. We've got an action kit and an email template, which I believe, of course, Emily has already dropped it into the chat. Thank you. So some of the things that we're going to be asking everybody to do this week is, 1, make sure to get that email off to the Tommy executives. We're sending it to the chairman of PVH, which is the parent company that owns Tommy, and to some other executives that do sustainability and supply chain work. And then if you have more time, you can also tag the 5 companies on Instagram: H&M, Zara, Tommy, American Eagle, and CNA. Ask them, we have the language there to protect progress and renew the Accord. And then the last thing is that if you have more time and you're interested in learning more about this campaign, in the action kit, we have FAQs. So you can learn more about what the Accord is, why it's different than voluntary safety agreements. And if you want, you can make your own content. You can do IG Lives about the Accord. You can make your own stories. Like, as always, we really just encourage all of you to, be your own advocates for these campaigns. So, and always you can reach out to me or Emily or the Remake account if you have questions about how to get more involved. Oh yeah, and I should update you guys. I have to say, like, these email writing actions really work. We have the pleasure of negotiating behind the scenes with these companies that we ask all of you to write to, and they're listening. We actually, filled up the Zara CEO's inbox, and we heard back from the companies immediately. And we do know that what's happening is most of the brands that we're pressuring are negotiating a new agreement. And the more we write them, the stronger that agreement gets. Because right now they're trying to basically replace the accord with something that's very weak and doesn't have a lot of power. So every time we write them, we put more and more pressure on them to negotiate like a really powerful successor agreement. So your voice really matters. Sending those emails really, really, really matters. So yeah, I just encourage all of you to keep using your voices, and thanks for participating. And Emily, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, can't underline enough how much that big swell of support, them getting hundreds and hundreds of emails on one day, how much of a difference that makes. We're hearing that directly from people who are in the, negotiations, are telling us that what we're doing is having an impact on the strength of what this renewal could look like. So truly appreciate all of you, and I will be sending out details about writing to Tommy this week, so look for that in your emails to come. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I wanted to bring up my colleague Amelia, who is our Director of Development, and she's going to give you a little update as well.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. I'm Amelia, the Director of Development, which basically means it is my job to ask for money. And today I'm asking you to donate to Remake. So you might be wondering why we even need donations, but we're a 5-year-old nonprofit. So we're really just getting started transforming the fashion industry. We have a lot to accomplish, and we plan to be here for a long time. As you all know, this year we have a very robust legislative agenda with SB 62 and the Accord, which Elizabeth just mentioned. We also have our ongoing consumer education and ambassador program work, and we have our brand transparency work to hold brands accountable. So all of this work takes funding, and we really cannot do it without financial support. Thank you so much to everyone who has already given to us, and to all of our monthly donors. We appreciate you so very much. If you're able to contribute, please go to our website, remake.world today, and make a donation. You can make a one-time donation, or you can set up a monthly recurring donation. Monthly donations are so wonderful because they allow us to plan for the future. So again, thank you so much for all of our monthly donations and donors. And then there are other ways to contribute as well. So you can do a Facebook fundraiser, which is really awesome. They allow you to dedicate your birthday and ask your friends for donations. Those are awesome and a great help. You can also share our work with your friends and family and ask them to contribute if they support our work and want to get involved. And beyond that, we have our Remake Sustainer Circle, which is a donor giving circle for larger donations. So if anyone is interested in that, please email me and I will be happy to send you more information. My email is amelia@remake.world. Thank you all so much for your time today and your hard work. We really appreciate you so very, very much. And with that, I'll give it back to Emily.
Thanks, Amelia. And thanks again so much to our guests, to Liz and Sammy. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be sending out that information about flooding Tommy's inbox shortly, as well as a link to the recording of this call, so you can reference all the great information that was shared and the events and programs that we have upcoming for the rest of the month. If you haven't signed the No New Clothes pledge yet, that's what I will leave you with as our parting ask for you today. I will turn it over to Aisha just to say goodbye and send us all out.
Amazing. I just wanted to say thank you all so much. Liz and Sammy, you've inspired us and I know galvanized us to continue thinking about No New Clothes and the solidarity for makers. You know, the work that Elizabeth has shared with the Accord, just to let you know, it matters. It may seem like sending an email doesn't make a difference, but it truly does. So what better way to start a Monday and a week by firing off that email? And to Amelia's point, we really are very transparent and accountable to you all. So know that, whatever is the cost of a Starbucks, or perhaps, the money we're saving with No New Clothes, any small donations helps us hold the industry transparent and accountable. But with that, it's just wonderful to see so many familiar faces, lots of new faces. Let's have a wonderful July. Let's keep up the activism, and let's stay in solidarity and community. So thank you all so very much, and we'll see you in August.